Hi, everyone. Let's welcome Justin here. He's from Trirec, and you'll be sharing with us on how we can fuel innovation by investing in people, climate, and the future. Hi, Justin.
Hi,
Tell us a little bit
Renee.
more about yourself, your background, and what inspired you to be in the field that you're in right now as a climate investor.
Thanks a lot for having me here, Renee. Really good to meet you guys. I'm Justin. I'm currently an investment principal from Trirec. My day-to-day role is really looking at climate technology companies globally, as well as impact companies, looking to invest into them, as well as to back their next phase of growth, really during the early stages of their growing journeys. So as an early stage climate tech venture capitalist investor, we typically invest about $2 to $5 million into startups and also to fund their growth beyond where we do invest into. We're a global fund, so many of our investments are outside this part of the world. But what we try to do well is also to connect and also to bring some of these startups back to Asia, where we hope to do meaningful work for them with the people that reside here in Asia.
Right. And what inspired you to focus on climate investment? Was there a
Mm.
defining moment?
Well, it was really by chance that I got involved in climate tech, and really just to keep it very short. So I first got involved with Trirec about 10 years ago, right after doing several stints in accounting, banking, finance. What happened was, at a point in time, we were about to launch the very first climate tech fund out of Asia, investing globally, as a spin-out from one of our investment management companies. So bottom line is I entered the industry by chance, but never left since, because the work that I do is both meaningful and impactful from various perspectives, right? Obviously you got the monetary and financial incentives, but also being able to see the work that you carry out, as well as the portfolio companies that you invest into, actually providing impact to, rural communities, for example. I think that has what allowed me to continue to do what I do, at least for the next foreseeable few years.
And over the years as an investor, right, what was the most unexpected lesson you've learned about being an investor? Were there different perspectives that you sort of had along the way because of something that had happened, or it didn't quite meet your certain expectations or whatnot? Are there any unexpected lessons you've learned?
Yeah, no, very, very good question. I think there are many lessons that you learn being a private investor, investing over the past 10 years, where there was a considerable amount of volatility in the markets, right? With geopolitics, with the boom and bust of the entire venture capital markets, especially, in the US right now, it's a really tough market. But one of the most important and also unexpected lesson, I've learned being an investor is to, always, number one, the first most important rule, to not lose money for clients and shareholders. And I say this coming from a few perspectives. Number one, it's really important that, we take a long-term horizon looking at climate tech companies. And a lot of times there could be very high and long market gyrations for a lot of companies that we choose to work with. For example, a particular industry like, the plastic packaging companies, they may not be in favor the past few years, but with certain regulatory changes, especially in the EU, banning single-use and virgin plastics, the game could change overnight for a lot of these companies. And how does this relate to, some of these lessons that we've learned is that a lot of times the founders that we choose to work with, we always ask them to hold their course. They need to work on reliable and sustainable business models and really hold on and stay on their course until they find the big break that allows them, to really take the business with skill and the level of growth that they initially started the business. And a lot of times, especially in the last 2 years, we've seen many failures in the US as well as in the Europe. Over here in Asia Pacific, I think founders tend to be a bit more resilient, with a lot of tenacity. And what we advise founders is sometimes outlasting your competition is in itself winning. And when founders actually try to outlast, whether by cutting costs or by looking at other venues to increase revenues, in the long run, they win. And in the longer run as well, us as VC investors also stand to benefit. So I think it's this kind of mindset that still drives the core values that Trirec really stands for, which is, there's only one rule in investing, right? Never lose money for clients. And it's really by working with long-term patient founders that you can actually execute on such plans.
So what do you look out for in a founder? Because, the traditional investors usually look for quick wins as well.
Mhm.
And, in your case, maybe it's not so much the case, but you want to look for founders who are more resilient and they have sustainable business models. That's more long term. So, what is your sort of preference, when you select a startup founder to work with? Yeah.
Yeah. I think fundamentally, I can be very honest with you, it is super difficult trying to assess a founder over the first few meetings, or even having known for the founder for only months before you decide to invest, right? And obviously, the first layers of qualities and characteristics that you look for, things like having an access to wide networks, being very resilient, but yet flexible to be able to change with changing market conditions as they do, right? I mean, a good example in the US is the changing of presidencies from every 4 to 5 years always results in a very different market environment for the startups to actually thrive or to fail. And fundamentally, you're looking for founders who never say die in these kind of circumstances. But beyond, I think the first layer of qualities that you really look for in founders, it's only by working with them over a long, long period of time and going through the ups and downs that you really cherish the types of qualities that may appear in some, but not so in the others. What are some? I think number one is the ability to continue when you feel very beat, when you feel that the whole world is against you, and sometimes it's a very lonely journey, right? And yet, as you correctly pointed out, founders who are here for the quick wins, most of the times, especially what we've faced in our work, are really doomed to fail. The problem with the entire climate tech industry is that we're not like a software or AI industry where you could gain or generate customers or clients. You could scale to hundreds of millions of customers in 1 or 2 years. For many climate tech companies, it's a slow burn journey trying to develop a technology, looking for your next round of financing, proving out certain milestones before raising financing again to really grow at scale, right? These journeys can easily take 10, 20, even 25 years, as we've experienced with one of our portfolio companies, Sunseed, who eventually went on to get success. But they started in 2011. It was a long 15-year journey before they managed to, turn out successful, right? So we're really looking for startups and founders who really have the long-term appetite to hold their ground, to really believe in what they're doing, as well as the business model that they're trying to create, and eventually being able to also take in the markets up and downs and staying on the course to eventually having a chance to succeed. And I mean having a chance because even though the founders can do everything right, but it does not mean that you're eventually going to make significant amounts of money, right? So I think that's what today I look for in a founder. It's not going to be visible from day one, but there are going to be milestones as well as OB markers that help me to identify whether I continue to support the founder or whether it's a relationship that's meant to be broken at some point in time.
And, what is the trend that you're seeing today that's worth investing?
So fundamentally, Trirec is very driven by investment thesis generation across the 3-4 series of funds that we have raised so far. The focus has always been the same, right? To look at technology, climate technology, companies, products, or services that could help to reduce or remove greenhouse gases. But the way in getting there has changed from fund to fund. For example, in our first fund, there was a very big focus in 2015 around the renewable energy development platforms, as well as in the charging space, because everyone was developing a new EV. But without charging technologies, you're going to face problems with range anxiety. You're not going to get the adoption that you want, right? So these two trends have really worked out for us. With exits, return investors a lot of their monies. And then when we come to the world today, the world is being shaped very differently by global trends. Number one, as people all know, there is a very big bifurcation now between US and the rest of the world. We used to call the bifurcation between US and China, but it seems that US is sort of pushing its allies to align with external parties instead, right? And this has created a lot of uncertainties with respect to the things like energy security, things of cost of raw materials for climate tech, etc. A very big focus on what I'm going to be looking at are in three key areas. Number one, in energy security backed by baseload type sources. So we spent a lot of time in the past looking at things like solar, wind, but all these are intermittent renewable energy sources, right? So we are now transitioning towards looking at more steady state production sources like geothermal, like nuclear, whether it be fusion or fission, and also grid level technologies to be able to assimilate the uncertainties of energy generation intermittency into everyday life. So that's one big aspect. The other big aspect is in the form of carbon capture and technologies. Why do I say that? So we here all live in the global south. We live in a sea of very young economies, whether you talk about Southeast Asia as a whole, or even the likes of India, where we're just starting to ramp up our economies. A lot of dependence and reliance is still going to be on fossil fuels. But the West is expecting us to decarbonize. A lot of times we tell our Western counterparts that it's not going to happen as fast as they want to. So what's going to be the mitigating factor and the balance between both? It's really in the form of carbon capture, which allows us to continue to rely on our pool of natural resources like oil, gas, coal, but yet still having a pathway to reducing our carbon footprint, right? So that's going to be very important. We work with a lot of Asian conglomerates and corporates in looking at these kind of solutions to be deployed in this part of the world. And the last one, which I sometimes hate to say this, but we also focus on AI as part of the climate journey. Having said that, we're not in the business of investing into, for example, large language models or very general AI technology. We're looking for very specific AI applications. For example, is there a way to blend or to look at AI to develop new materials to drive costs down for new climate technologies, right? So we're seeing that happen in the solar panel industry. Or are we looking at AI, very application specific AI technologies like AI in mining, where the world is going to need more raw materials, right? But can we extract them from the earth a bit more, cleanly, as well as a bit more efficiently? So those are the three big focus for us in the next coming years, especially as part of our new fund that we just launched.
Interesting. And what would be your advice, right? Something that you wish more startup founders actually knew before seeking investment from you?
Yeah. Well, this is something that I always tell my founders and people or potential founders that I'm looking to invest into, in that the climate tech game is very different from typical VC investing. It's incredibly important to know two things. Number one is you can take money from me at the early stages, but you better be sure to know what sort of milestones you're going to achieve with my capital that comes in, because you're going in the second part of the equation is you're going to be speaking to next round investors or future investors in multiple rounds, right? And they are going to demand to see some sort of milestones, traction, be it commercial, be it technological, be it an organizational, right? And unless you know what you're working towards, a lot of times you end up either raising too little money or raising too much money, but getting nowhere. And this is very important for climate technology because, again, as I said, in some of these software companies where it's really growth at all costs to acquire customers, it's a very clear path, a very clear metric to grow or to exit the company, right? Whether it be in an IPO or trade sale. In climate tech, we see growth as in forms of stage gates, where you probably need to clear each stages comfortably before you're able to grow to the next one. A lot of times, given hardware businesses, it's driven by what do you actually have on hand in terms of development, again, commercially or on a tech front. And so it is is knowing these kind of milestones and what you are very clear you want to hit before you go out there to raise capital, and being able to put together a story. And then we discuss, right? How much buffer do you need? Are you going to hit these milestones in time, or do you need more time, etc.? But fundamentally, I think it's all about knowing your objectives when you go out there to raise capital. Sometimes I think founders, they struggle because a lot of times there is no one there at the next stages trying to advise them what they want to see.
Right. So it's always the next round that you always have to think about. And knowing whether it is sufficient money or not, also depending on your long-term game plan.
Yes.
Maybe the founders these days are more short-term focused, right? Then it's hard for them to make that prediction. But with so much innovation happening in climate tech, right? How do you identify game-changing ideas versus it's just another trend? It's just it's just a new thing, but it's going to be short-lived, right? So how do you identify good businesses to invest in?
I would look at it from a very top-down perspective first, in that in climate tech, there are potentially two types of investors, or two types of ways that you could probably invest, right? One is really looking at silver bullet technologies. And what are silver bullet technologies? For instance, if I were to, I use nuclear fusion as an example. And then for, some of the folks out there, nuclear is very interesting. We have historically always focused on fission. And fission is effectively the splitting of atoms uncontrollably to generate power, right? The problem is that once you actually start, it's very difficult to stop. That creates, issues like Chernobyl, Fukushima, and unintended effects that we don't want to. But things like fusion, where you spend a lot of energy trying to contain a fusion reaction between two atoms, and then potentially try to generate more energy that's required than to power it, is currently being developed in our market. Commercialization is perhaps still far away, but this is the example of technology where if it's really fully commercialized in our lifetime, 20, 30 years down the road, you think about what sort of industries and impact it would have in our world. Number one, do you need oil and gas for production of energy in the future? Do you still need coal-fired plants, right? Do you even need cleaner technologies like solar? And what would happen in a world where, every country can have its own independent source of power? What would happen to the oil-producing states in the Middle East, right? So these are very big, game changers in the world that people are trying to sprint towards. And if it so happens to commercialize, it changes the world for everyone. But to get there, it's a crazy long journey required, and a lot of capital is required, and patient capital or risk capital that's required. On the other hand, right, people also can invest into what I call transitional climate tech. So transitional climate tech is not about getting there in a leapfrog manner, but taking baby steps, right? Every step of investments, I seek to introduce, or I seek to gather, let's say about 10, 20% energy efficiency. What do I mean? You could be investing into a manufacturing business, putting in software and hardware to track the better automation of rules for a particular machinery on off, parameters around a particular machinery's operating parameters to reduce the energy consumed. So it's not crazy technology, but fundamentally, for every sort of innovation, maybe you still could engender 10, 20% of an entire plant's energy consumption, right? And then the thought process is this: the gestational periods for such technologies are going to be much shorter, because it's, the type of technologies that you're going to develop sometimes based on software, or sometimes just based on better engineering rules with a lot of historical data. It's going to get out there to the market a lot faster. You're potentially going to be able to get your returns faster as well, but not your 100, 1,000x type of venture returns, right? So at the end of the day, there are two types of investments that potentially could be made, and obviously the spectrum in between. The way Trirec looks at investing is really to figure out at any given point in time, what are the core bottlenecks that allows our population to actually continue to reduce the energy consumption or to remove greenhouse gases. And there are going to be trends at any given day because climate tech is very, very heavily driven by geopolitics as well as regulations. For example, over the past few years, you have big policies like the US IRA or the in the EU as well, Clean Technology Act, which seeks to obviously drive investments into certain areas like hydrogen, battery recycling, and so on and so forth, right? So if you're able to understand what's going to come next, right, from a top-down perspective, and slowly look into the industry to find startups who potentially would benefit from such regulatory changes, I think that's how we continue to identify trends. As I've said, across the different fronts, you're going to have different focus areas just because the world moves at different paces. And also cost curves and technological inflection points have also developed and continue to develop over time. So that's how we like to invest. And also the reason why we invest globally rather than being very sector specific or geographically specific, which I think comes alongside with a lot of risk for some of the funds that we know.
It's interesting because you mentioned about silver bullet technologies, and top of mind is that, okay, do you work mostly with institutions because they have the backing, right? They have the research funds, right? They have the resources to even kickstart the R&D. Versus, any other startup founder will have a hard time if they do it privately. So would you mostly work with the institutions that will then spin off? Or would you then work with private companies in which, you fund them to do their R&D and innovation that will bring a good outcome because they're more commercial by nature? How do you balance these two? Or do you invest in this too, or you have a preference also?
Yeah. We do not distinguish, to be very honest, in terms of sourcing or whether it comes from a private or public channel. And why I say that is because we also want to be agnostic to sourcing channels and whatever best deal that we see and we think are there in the market, we invest into. I'll give an example. So you correctly pointed out that because we get involved in, for example, we still get involved in silver bullet technologies, don't get me wrong, right? And a lot of the creation hubs for these kind of technologies are typically born out of institutes of higher learning. Take, for example, we just did a deal with a startup that was spun out of Cambridge University. So this startup is involved in carbon capture. It has developed a new novel material using AI to generate materials, and they call these materials monolithic metallic organic framework. It's a mouthful, but what these structures effectively, they act like a sponge in being able to capture CO2 or other gases at a very cheap cost and at very stable operating parameters, right? And so in the UK alone, there are already several of these kind of hubs, but we work with hubs across globally. So in the US, Israel as well as some of our neighbors down south in Australia and New Zealand. And they continue to feed us very novel technologies, which the problem that I see sometimes is a lot of times they're trying to fit technologies without a real business case. So we do have to sieve and try to figure out whether it's going to be eventually commercializable. But on the flip side, we also have our fair share of working with startups that are generated from more of the private side. A very interesting startup that we also backed together with Breakthrough Ventures, which is backed by Bill Gates, is a nuclear fusion startup. So we have worked with this founder who used to be advisor for nuclear energy for Bill Gates. And Bill Gates effectively told him, why am I getting you to back other fusion startups when I could just back you to start a nuclear company? And so he did just that. We got to know him. And then he subsequently made a new investment into his company just about 6 months ago. So again, I do not distinguish what kind of sourcing it comes from, but it has to have all the necessary ingredients of what I think would make a startup succeed, whether it be team, a right business case and model in the future, right? It may not need one now, but especially if you're investing early stage, you will need to be profitable eventually. And obviously having a large enough market or a real problem that you really want to solve in this world.
And was there an investment that you made that had an unexpected turn or impact, either for the industry, for the economy, for the society? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely there is, and this is still an investment that really strikes at my and tugs at my heart. It's not an investment that went well, to be very honest. So this is sort of an impact deal that we did, or rather we did in back in 2018. This was a company based in Myanmar, and what the company did was actually providing solar home systems and through a payment method, as what you call pay as you go solar, which effectively is sort of paying for the equipment as you go ahead to sort of use it and pay for itself. Um, we made a due diligence trip to Myanmar, visiting some of the poorest communities there, which is, this technology was meant to benefit. And, you hear a lot of stories from the villagers about how, again, uh, energy access is very poor. To them, having the ability to turn on a light bulb is a luxury. In fact, in the past, a lot of them use kerosene lamps as a way to study, to work, especially in the later part of the day. There were also some instances where we were told that because of the lack of access and infrastructure, right? There was a villager whose kid actually got bitten by a poisonous snake, but there was no medical infrastructure, and he had to run to the nearest hospital or carry the boy to the nearest hospital for like 2.5 hours. But the boy eventually did not make it. So I think it's with these kind of investments that we do that we hopefully, sometimes also not on top of the financial returns that we consider very strongly, but it's also the impact that we drive. Unfortunately, as much as we have liked to help Myanmar as an entire country who went through the military coup back in 2021 has really suffered. I think the last I heard, infighting in several regions have really increased. Capital flows are also very tight, and that has caused basically new investors' money to really be very little these days, right? But again, it's something that still is something that I'll always remember, and hopefully, there would be a convergence between impact deals as well as the financial returns that they are able to drive for funds in being able to then catalyze more investments that go into these areas.
That's an interesting one on impact deals because it's hard to sort of define right returns.
Yes.
But it hits the heartstrings. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, being a father yourself, now you have two kids, right? And how has fatherhood changed the way you approach, your decision making and how you decide on which founder to work with, and the type of investment that you make? Yeah.
uh, it's a sort of a question that I think has really internalized over the past, call it 2 years, especially with the birth of my elder one, just about 2 years ago. I guess fundamentally it matures you as a person, because you tend actually to take in, in parenthood especially, right? When it comes to your kids who are fundamentally more important than yourself, um, anything that happens, whether in terms of the well-being of the kid, future educations, future paths that the kids want to take, I think you tend to actually absorb and weigh all options a lot more seriously, right? Vis-a-vis sometimes myself, right? I think you sometimes also lose that level of spontaneity, but in return, you actually gain an ability to weigh all sorts of the balances and decisions that you need to make before finally coming to a decision. I think that has really helped myself personally in sort of decision making and investment work. Primarily because a lot of times we try to take away the emotional side of the person when it comes to investing and really focus on the logic as well as the facts. And then in that sense, approaching again leadership, sometimes there are people that say that raising a child is really no different than raising a company. And I'm merely part of that equation in raising a company, right? Because really to the founders, the companies are their babies. I'm there really helping the founders and trying to make better, more informed decisions, but also fundamentally knowing that sometimes they struggle to make decisions just because they treat it so importantly. And I relate to that a lot more now. I had to relate to that, especially so in the past 2 years where we had to make a lot of important decisions and very time critical decisions actually to do things like cost cutting, which involves letting go of people or pivoting. And all these are not important decisions. All these are not you know decisions that the founders can take very lightly, right? So in that sense, I learned to appreciate and also to sympathize a lot more with my founders, which I think they have also hopefully benefited over the past couple of years.
And the different styles of managing, the companies that you invest in.
Mhm.
Some investors will say, I'm just gonna invest when they need help, they come look for me, but I'm not gonna so-called micromanage them, and I won't get into it too much. Whereas there are some investors who say, I would love to see a greater impact. I would like to work with the team closely and even influence, the founders to get into a direction in which you think can bring the most returns. What type of investor are you?
Um, I would say that with the right mix of investor, primarily because I concur with a couple of points that you mentioned. I think most important point number one, we're not here to run the business on your behalf. At the end of the day, I back you and I choose you because I believe that you have your subject matter expertise, and I believe that you could run this business way better than I can. But I'm also not here to give you free reign to do whatever you want, especially if there are considerable amounts of monies that have been invested, right? So, Trirec, as the partners and ourselves included, we are very hands-on people. Not to the extent where we get involved in day to day, but we definitely want to have some level, or in fact, an access or channel to the founders or the board if we need to. Majority of the deals that we do, we sit on the board with some level of representation. But beyond that, there's an agreement between all the senior team members in Trirec and that the board is not enough. You need to have a direct comms to founders. If they want to call you for any given problem, they should be able to reach you on mobile and not have to reach you via email. I think that's the bare minimum when it comes to working with the founders, right? But more importantly, we want to exert the right level of firmness, but yet also sympathy when it comes to working with founders. It's a very difficult balance to strike, I can tell you, and I kid you not, because you're always having to evaluate whether a founder needs more of something or less of something, right? Not all founders are created equally, as with not all investors are the same. A lot of times, it's not so much as taking a single approach to every given founder, but really being able to assess which team requires what type of parenting, and then working from there onwards. So there are instances, I say here, not trying to sound as if I'm overbearing or not, but where we hold meetings every week or every bi-weekly to make sure that companies on the right track. And most of these times, it's with companies that have something going on for them, but they need a lot of help, especially on the non-business side of things, right? When you talk about fundraising, capital budgeting, and things like that. There are also going to be companies where you have very seasoned founders, have done the game, played the game, second, third time already. It's a serial entrepreneur. I think those are circumstances where we also can let loose the reins a bit and really be involved from more of a strategic viewpoint, whether on the board or also assisting a lot of times with opening new markets for them. So, in short summary to your question is, it really depends, right? But we are very happy to be very hands-on investors. We are very happy to step in where needed. And that's also the reason why we're not a spray and pray investor. Every given fund will have max 15 portfolio companies. each each partner and senior team member like myself would probably take on no more than 5 to 6 companies where we can devote full attention when needed.
Right. And if we have someone listening today who is interested in making an impact in climate tech, whether as an investor going into this space or in a new entrepreneur going into this space, what is the first step you think they should take?
The first step is really to consider whether you want to start a company. And that to me is always the toughest step to take because, a lot of times, looking back, even with the founders that have succeeded, if I ask them whether they would do this all over again, and the answer sometimes could be a no. And because, I've seen the sacrifices of founders, whether from a health perspective or whether from familial commitments and just not having time to themselves, it's really challenging, right? So number one, internalize with yourself whether you really are in it for the money, which is an okay reason to have, or you're in it to make an impact, or so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think that reason has to be strong enough for you to withstand everything that is going to be thrown at you, every failure or every no that you hear from an investment meeting, for example, or from a business or revenue meeting, right? In the hopes of even then being able to exit on the other side. It's famously out of 10 startups, only one succeed. I think throughout my years, that is very, very true. So the first step is really to build that belief in yourself and to allow it to go a long, long way in hearing all the naysayers.
What's the ratio of success? 1:10, 1:100, 1:1.
I think 1:10, one in 10 companies will eventually cross the chasm and make it successful. And maybe another 2 to 4 that will be okay, some level of success, but it's not the type where you're going to see a big IPO or a big trade sale. And then you're looking at about easily 3 to 5 failures across every 10 companies for various reasons, right? Whether it's for a product market fit failure, whether it's a founder failure, or whether generally it's just a fundraising climate failure. There are too many reasons for a company to fail as vis-a-vis a company that can succeed. And at the end of the day, a lot of it is still driven by luck.
Wow, driven by luck, huh? That's very hard to quantify.
It's very hard to quantify. You can only continue to work hard and continue to do good at your business in hoping that something somewhere will eventually look into your favor.
Wow.
As my boss always says, right? Sometimes it's better to be lucky in life than to be the smartest person in life.
Oh, that's something I work towards. It's by luck, right? Yeah, but you need to create the opportunity for that luck to happen, right? Yeah, okay. So, if you could share one inspirational quote and message to our audience, right? Something that you could inspire them to take on, leadership roles or in sustainability, or to encourage the ecosystem to look into it, right? On climate tech as well. What would that be?
It's something that I've always stood by over the past 10 years. It's a quote by Winston Churchill. People may like or hate him. It's very bipolar, but he said this before: success is not final, and failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. I think this is very prevalent in the past 2 years, where we saw a lot of difficulties from startups, even those better performing ones, in not being able to raise capital. A lot of the startups had to swallow a very bitter pill in, again, headcount reduction, pivoting, closing the business. But at the end of the day, sometimes even knowing that you have an uphill task ahead of you, or knowing that you're beat, right, is really the courage that and hope that you continue to keep going that really distinguishes between, maybe a better founder than the rest. And at the end of the day, as I said, sometimes luck plays a very big part. Success is not final, but failure is also not fatal. What door which may close for you today, may be another door that opens a new market or a new path for you the day after. Rejection by an investor does not mean no from thousands of the other investors out there, right? So really, I think this quote has helped to guide myself and also advising a lot of the companies that I work with in that if you could still continue to do what you're doing, go for it. If you really think that you've exhausted all means and you've fought a good battle, give yourself a pat on the back. When it's time to close up, but yet always look forward to, what the whole experience and journey has taught you and use that to your advantage. And I say this with, fact that I've seen my fair share of companies closing as well. It's never a blame game. It's always a bittersweet journey, having walked the journey with some of these founders. But I've never ever regretted working with any of my founders, even if some of the worst ones, because it was my decision to make when I chose to partner up with them in the first place, right? And we all walked away learning more rather than having not learned at all.
Oh, that's a good one. Thank you for that. And so regardless of your outcome and destiny, always enjoy that journey and learn from it, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Justin.